This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
.98 episodes in this Friday morning. Thanks as always for the subscribe or the download, the stream, however you have found this podcast, be it on iTunes, Stitcher, or anywhere else on the interwebs. You can find us on YouTube as well. This is Play-by-Playcast. It's the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. My name is Joel Godet. It is a professional development podcast that dives into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparations of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. And with the topic of today's show, I should tell you that the rapid-fire nature of that last sentence I took from Colt Cabana's The Art of Wrestling. We'll get to that in a second. You can find us on social media, Twitter, at PXPcast. I am at Joel Godet, JoelGodet, or you can shoot me an email, jgodett at bsu.edu, BSU, for Ball State University. This is our 98th episode, which means, simple math, next week is 99, and 2 weeks from now is our 100th episode, and I'm kind of pumped about our next couple of guests. Lanny Fratteri, the former voice of the Pittsburgh Pirates for 33 years. He currently teaches at Waynesburg University in Western Pennsylvania and does a lot of high school broadcasting there, but for 3 decades was the voice of the Pittsburgh Pirates through the good and the bad. Really good conversation coming up next week on the podcast. And then episode 100, I'm really excited for. I'm not going to tell you who the guest is. And like I know Sean Aronson on The Voice Behind the Voice had Joe Buck on for his 100th episode. I have not gone Joe Buck big, but our 100th episode for this podcast is somebody who you will have heard of. I personally think is one of the better broadcasters out there right now, and who personally means a lot to me as well. And his name comes up on this podcast all the time. So I'm excited for our 100th episode. It's not Bob Costas, by the way. Logan Anderson just talked to Bob Costas, for what it's worth. If you have not ever listened to the Say the Damn Score podcast, Bob Costas is on that this week. So go give that one a listen as well. When you're done with this one, go check out Bob Costas on Say the Damn Score. Aside, I am also going to be on Say the Damn Score coming up at some point soon. I really hope it's not the next episode. Because if you just listen to Bob Costas, and then the next episode is me, I don't know what I'm going to tell you that is of any use. I don't know what I'm going to tell you of any use anyway, but certainly not following Bob Costas. But Bob is, he's on Logan's podcast this week, so do go check that one out. And then again, Lanny Fratteri will be with us next week, and then a special guest coming up on episode 100. I'm going to keep that under wraps for right now, but I think you guys will enjoy it. Our guest today comes from the world of professional wrestling, or sports entertainment. His name is Rich Bocchini, formerly known as Rich Brennan when he worked in the WWE, and currently works with MLW Fusion, Major League Wrestling on beIN Sports, Friday nights at 8 o'clock. Check your local cable listings, and you can check out MLW Fusion on beIN Sports. We'll get to that in a second, but I wanted to dive into the how and why we got to today's episode. I'm a big wrestling fan. Like, my Monday nights, occupado. My Tuesday nights, usually occupied. If not, I'll watch it on DVR. Raw on Mondays, SmackDown on Tuesdays. Sundays once a month, yeah, I'm watching the pay-per-view. WrestleMania, I watched on the baseball bus on the way back from our Eastern Michigan road trip. The guy sitting behind me thought it was ridiculous. I'm just loving up Ronda Rousey beating the dickens out of Triple H. I was huge into it as a kid. I've got a picture of me with a Hulkster hat flexing at Universal Studios when I was a child. So I was really big into pro wrestling as a child. I had my own wrestling association when I was a kid. I had a whole list of wrestlers, and they all had names that I made up that were horrible. I had stables. I would wrestle my pillow for my actual belt. Like, that was the championship belt. I didn't go to the store and buy one. It was just my belt. Like, my belt was the title belt. So that was a thing. I had the action figures, everything. Kind of fell out of watching wrestling as I got older. But when I got to Ball State 6 years ago, our current general manager of our corporate properties, Ball State Sports Properties, now under Learfield, is a diehard wrestling fan. Like, has the big gold belt autographed by Ric Flair framed and hanging in his house. I think has a Ric Flair authentic, you know what, I don't think, I know, he wore it to work one day. Has a Ric Flair authentic robe. He's kind of into it. And every year he throws a Royal Rumble party. I don't know about the legalities of that, like the whole, it's like a Super Bowl party, isn't it? Like, you invite a bunch of people to watch over the same thing on the same TV. But every year he has a Royal Rumble party, and everybody gets a number, and, like, it gives everybody vested interest in what they're watching. Even if they're not wrestling fans, they're still into it because they want their guy to win, even though they get Apollo Crews, which was me 2 years ago. So that kind of got me back into wrestling. And I love it now. And it's a melding of my two worlds when I see Michael Cole on television. Or when I see, Tom Phillips or Mauro Ranallo, or a couple of years ago, Rich Brennan, when he was on NXT and SmackDown. And when I was growing up, too, Tony Schiavone, who did WCW and now does, with Rich, MLW Fusion on beIN Sports. There is a play-by-play broadcaster on professional wrestling, and it has fascinated me because it is my two worlds colliding. And there are questions I've always had about it. You'll listen to the wrestling podcast and they'll say, well, the announcer said this, and, he was probably told that in his ear. So I was curious, how much stuff are you told in your ear? What are you hearing from a producer? What are things you're being told to say? What are things you're being directed? How are you being pointed? What's captaining the ship? Kind of what's the behind the scenes of the play-by-play side of a professional wrestling broadcast? How do they research their stories? Obviously, it's male soap opera is professional wrestling. There's General Hospital, and not that women don't like wrestling, they do, and not that men don't watch General Hospital. But it's soap opera. We get into it for the storylines. So the broadcaster is a big part of telling that story. How do they do their preparation? How do they get themselves tuned in to the story the wrestlers want to tell? How do they know the background that this wrestler wants to paint? So kind of what's that like? How do they organize themselves, and do they have charts? Found out they kind of in some sort of ways do. So I was curious about that side of things. And then certainly if you've ever watched pro wrestling, you know that the announce table almost always gets destroyed, particularly if it's the Spanish announce table. I've always been curious what it would be like to have my broadcast position destroyed. Never happened in a basketball game. It's come close, never happened. Wrestling, it happens on the regular. So I've always wanted to know how you deal with that. What happens when somebody rips your monitor away? What happens if your equipment stops working because, I don't know, Roman Reigns is lying on it? So there's so many questions I've had about play-by-play broadcasting of pro wrestling. And I reached out to Rich Bocchini to hopefully answer some of those. And I think we do in a lot of respects on this episode. A little bit about Rich. Formerly was the voice of NXT, which is technically the developmental system for WWE. It is the developmental system. It's the developmental brand, but it's not really developmental. They put on huge shows and they have a weekly show. It's technically developmental, but it's in a lot of ways its own brand. He was the voice of that on the WWE network, eventually got promoted to SmackDown, and now, as I mentioned, is the voice with Tony Schiavone of MLW Fusion on beIN Sports. It's available on Xfinity, DirecTV, Dish, AT&T, Uverse, and more. I'm reading this right off their website. Contact your provider and request beIN Sports. If you don't get it, you can visit getbein, bein.beinsports.com for local listings, and also watch Major League Wrestling on beIN Sports or beIN Sports Connect. It also streams on Sling, Fubo, not Fubu. It would stream on your t-shirt. Sling, Fubo, and Yip. I don't know what the other two things are. but I do know what Sling is. It streams on all of those providers. You can watch it on beIN Sports via desktop, mobile app, or home device as well. So that is how you access MLW Fusion, Rich Bocchini's current project. And that's where we actually start our conversation about broadcasting professional wrestling. His current work with MLW Fusion, which means he's working with Tony Schiavone, who, as I said, one of the giants of this industry from a play-by-play standpoint, when he was the voice of Monday Nitro with WCW. So my first question, what's it like to work with Tony Schiavone and learn from him on a night-in, night-out basis? Rich Bocchini is our guest this week on Play-by-Playcast.
He's just so he's been out of wrestling for a long time and didn't want to be involved in wrestling for a long time. He just avoided it and kind of unwillingly got dragged back into it with his, this podcast with Conrad, and the numbers that they do for that, I think it exceeded expectations for everybody. So he's found some fun in it. We enjoy working together. At least I enjoyed working with him. He tells me he enjoys working with me. Just as far as learning and stuff, Tony's just the thing that I've always been a fan of with Tony, even going back to when I first started watching him, say like 85, 86 on the old studio show that the NWA did on TBS. He was always so smooth. And he's a baseball guy at heart. That's how he got into wrestling. He worked for the Crockett's, who owned the Charlotte O's. He worked in Greensboro for a bit, but he ended up in wrestling because he worked for the Crockett family, and he worked for their baseball team in Charlotte. So he's a baseball guy. So he has that kind of smooth baseball delivery and that calm baseball delivery, even though Schiavone for a while was known as kind of being the guy who overhyped everything. Especially at the end of WCW, where everything was the greatest night in the history of our sport. He's got a very smooth, very calm delivery when he's allowed just to be him, which is the Tony that we're getting now. We're more getting like the 85, 86 Tony than we are the 98, 99 Tony right now, which is cool. But just as far as learning, so just slow down, calm down, relax, have fun, and sometimes I think it helps to be reminded of that. For lack of a better term, like I joke that I still have PTSD from WWE for a little bit, but it's just I don't know. It's just it's such a high pressure environment when you're there that I don't want to say it's hard to have fun, but it's kind of you're on edge more. You're on eggshells. Where with this, working with Tony again, he's just if I'm in my head, he's like, dude, stop! Like, get out of your head, just have fun, and we do. So that every time that I work with him, as I said on Twitter the other day, I learned stuff. Like he handled more play-by-play on this last show, and just watching him work, just watching the way he does intros, and I mean, he's a master at what he does, and it was very, very cool in a lot of ways to be able to kind of sit next to him and I don't want to say take on the secondary role being a color guy, but I'm used to being a play-by-play guy. I'm used to calling play-by-play, and on this last set of tapings we did, I was more of a color guy. So I get to observe a little bit more of what Tony was doing, and it's, again, just a reminder, a lot of times it's probably it probably applies to baseball and hockey and football and basketball and everything. Slow down. You know what I mean? Like there's no rush. Slow down.
On that note, and I'm curious because I've gotten into wrestling. I was big into it when I was a kid, and I've gotten into it again more recently in the last 6 years. Now that I'm in broadcasting, I kind of look at it from a different perspective on that side of things, and I've always been very curious about the broadcast side of pro wrestling. And I had seen an interview that you did where you basically said, at least on the WWE side, you're less of a play-by-play announcer and more of an actor that plays a play-by-play announcer on TV. So what's different between what you do as a play-by-play guy in wrestling, particularly at the WWE level, versus what you would do if you were in, hockey coming up, or like Tony, if you're coming up through baseball?
Man, I could probably expand on this for like 2 hours.
It's a loaded question, yeah.
Yeah, and try to really break down what you're asking. I'm going to I'll try to keep it as simple as I can, from my perspective. And if I start rambling or whatever, feel free to cut me off. Whatever. So the basic long and short of being a wrestling play-by-play guy, number one is you need to get stories over, right? So whatever the particular story is that you're telling, you need to be able to tell that story and give people a reason to care about the match that's happening. Because I always joke around without stories, wrestling's just two guys in their underwear rolling around in a ring, right? So and it's an exaggeration, but without stories, without context, without setting things up, nothing matters. What does it mean? It's just two guys wrestling. Sometimes that can be awesome when you have two like real technical, you say you have like two real technical luchadors or two real impressive in-ring guys. Like imagine you have like Ricochet against I've called Ricochet against Shane Strickland, because those two in the ring, and you may not need a story for that matchup because they can tell a story, but having stories, having things that people relate to, that's the essence of what pro wrestling is. So, it's not just two guys wrestling. It's, well, this guy screwed over this guy, and now they're going to fight over whatever. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so, no. As far as the job goes, it really depends on where you are and what your producer wants and what the promoter wants. I think outwardly, when we think of doing wrestling play-by-play, I think the average fan just thinks that you kind of go and you just kind of call the matches, which is the furthest thing from the truth. I don't want to say everything is scripted, but there, at the WWE level anyway, there are certain story points that like you have to get over, or else you're going to get screamed at. That keeping the traffic straight, and that's important for any play-by-play job, but especially in WWE with the amount of moving parts that they have. Making sure that you get to the breaks on time, and making sure that you lead into the breaks properly, making sure that if there's a package coming up, you can talk to the package properly, different things like that. But continually everything you're doing is telling the story. So you're less of a quote-unquote play-by-play guy. Like I want to say in my headset, the thing that I probably heard more often than not was, it's not radio, right? So I don't need to tell you, oh my God, here goes so-and-so climbing to the top turnbuckle. Oh my God, what a crossbody, or whatever. So you can see that. You know what I mean? So you kind of need to explain a little bit more. Here goes whatever. Here goes Neville to the top. My God, he might be looking for the red arrow. It's devastating finishing maneuver. He's one of the best high flyers in the business. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
WWE is very particular in the way that they want things done. MLW, like for instance, MLW has been a lot more loose. But there's still elements of, things that you have to get in, stories that need to be told. And the long and short maybe of calling wrestling play-by-play is that it doesn't change from promotion to promotion in some ways, where the mechanics of calling a match, don't change no matter where you go. It doesn't matter if you're in WWE or Lucha Underground or whatever. The mechanics of calling a match, being able to recognize the different pieces of a match and the different parts of a match are those are universal. So, and what I mean by that is, if you go out to call a match and you know that the match is 8 minutes curtain to curtain, in the segment that you have 8 minutes curtain to curtain, then going into it that you're going to get, you get your entrances, you get a little bit in the beginning. You're probably going to go right into some heel heat, and in a match that short that when the babyface starts to make this comeback, that's probably really the comeback, as opposed to say like a 20-minute, 30-minute like WrestleMania match where you're going to have multiple heat segments, multiple cutoff segments, multiple shine segments. You're probably going to have a couple of hope spots where your babyface is coming back up, only for the heel to cut him off. before your heel eventually gets into the comeback. I'm sorry, your babyface gets into the comeback, and you go into the, assuming the babyface is winning, and you get into your finish. So those elements of a match don't change. It's just, as a play-by-play guy, you need to be able to recognize what those elements of a match are and adjust your commentary accordingly.
So
it takes time. There's no way to teach it or to learn it. It's just reps. You have to just keep doing it.
I'm curious on that note too. I mean, do you know 100% what's going to happen in terms of spots in matches or finishes in particular? And how do you balance, what you know going in, what you want to know going in, versus still being able to produce a call that sounds authentic?
A little bit of both. Depending on the match, I may ask for more or less. And here's the thing: when you're taping, say, 4 hours of TV at a time, like NXT did, like we do with MLW, like there's simply not enough time for the play-by-play guys to go and get details on every match. Like we'll have the story clearly because that stuff's laid out, but as far as what's happening in every match, a lot of times you don't have time to get that stuff ahead of time. So that's where you're relying on your producers in the headset to tip you off on things and to kind of guide you. If you start turning right, but you should be turning left, that's on your producer to get you back where you need to be. Because you may start talking about something thinking that it's going a certain way, but it's really not. So that's where your producer, who knows what's happening in the match, is probably sitting there with the agent that put the match together. If they hear you going a certain way, then they can guide you back to where you need to go. As far as knowing the elements of the match, there are certain things that I like to know. Sometimes I like to know the finish, but more often than not, especially like a title match, I don't necessarily want to know exactly what's going to happen. I want to be surprised, unless it's something so specific that, like, if I didn't know it, it'd screw it up. But it's a very fine line. One of the things that I always point to was, I go back to the first tape of our evolution. It's probably the best example that I can think of for this. That was Sami Zayn and Neville. Neville was the NXT champion, and they were competing for the NXT title.
I was going to say, did you know Sami was going to win going into that?
I had a sense that he was going to win, but I didn't know for sure.
Okay, cool.
And
So you're one of us, basically.
Nobody told me one way or the other. Like, I kind of knew, but it wasn't like, yes, for sure he's going over.
Sure.
The only thing that I remember seeing him and Neville in Gorilla before the show. And here's another thing, too. A lot of times, like a big show like that, those matches are, a lot of times they're going to be laid out ahead of time, so guys are going to know what they're doing. Sometimes they're not. And for regular shows, sometimes that stuff isn't laid out. So before the show, I may go up to somebody, hey, anything you guys want me to know about your match? And a lot of times the answer is, shit, we haven't even had a chance to put it together yet. You know what I mean? So there's some of that. But that, that the Sami Neville match in particular, they were in Gorilla before we went out, and we were talking, and I asked her, hey, fellas, I was actually there it was me and Graves who were there, and I said, hey, anything you guys want us to know? I said, don't tell me the finish if you don't want to tell me the finish, but anything you want me to know. And Sami told me about the belt spot. And there's a spot in the match where I think Neville gets the belt and like the referee gets knocked down or something. So then Sami picks up the belt and he's got this clear shot at Neville where he can just clock him with the belt, get the referee, count 1, 2, 3, and now he's the champion. But Sami's always been the good guy. He's always been the guy who does things the right way. He doesn't take shortcuts. Neville's been taking shortcuts and trying to screw him the whole time. So it's this moral dilemma for Sami. Holy shit, do I hit him with this belt and win the match or not? So they told us that. So Graves and I were able to decide ahead of time kind of who we were going to back in that particular instant. So if you go back and you watch that, I'm yelling, Sami, not like this, Sami, not like this. And Graves is like, hell yes, like this. It's the championship. And actually, the other thing in that match, that his career was on the line, supposedly. So it's like, Sammy, this is your career that's on the line. No time for morals. I'm like, Sammy, not like this, Sammy. And ultimately, he decides not to, and he wins. He wins with the hula kick, and everybody's happy, and he did it the right way, and he didn't have to compromise his morals, and blah 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 blah. So that's an example of knowing without knowing exactly how, what, when, or why. But I knew it was coming. So I was able to kind of paint that picture where again, I'm backing him up, and I'm like, don't sell your ideals. Don't sell short your ideals. And Graves is like, no, fuck that. You know what I mean? Like, no, hit him with the belt. This is your career that's on the line. The hell is you got to do it? And I think one of the lines he has to say is, you got to do what you got to do. So that's an example of knowing but not knowing.
What's prep like for something like that? And then even broader scale, like every time I sit at home and I'm watching Monday Night Raw or SmackDown or a pay-per-view or whatever, and Cole will say something to the effect of, Rollins has wanted this his entire life. He's been dreaming of this moment since he was 10 years old. Do you guys have those conversations with all of the talent? Will you sit down with each one of them and kind of map out exactly what they once said? And then organizationally, do you have like a card on every guy or a file on every person that you can kind of have for quick reference? I guess just what organizationally is your prep like, so that on national television, you can tell these stories the best way possible.
A lot of times it's stuff that'll be in like one of the packages or something. A lot of times you'll refer to something that was said in an interview.
Okay.
So there's that. But yeah, as far as having like cards on individual guys, like in WWE, sorry, I'm yawning, man.
You're good.
In WWE, for instance, on my iPad, actually Cole has this, and I'm guessing Tom, and I don't know Vic. I don't know if they use the same kind of system, but I started doing what Cole did, where on my iPad, I have a folder on my iPad, and just in like the notes, the Apple Notes or whatever, and I just have basically like a file on each guy that I can pull up and get all that pertinent info. It's like anything else though. Like kind of once you get going, like you know this stuff. You know what I mean? It's kind of like if you're calling baseball or basketball, by like a couple of weeks into the season, like your team. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like
you don't really need to have this no or that no. You just kind of know. But that said, sometimes there are certain things that relate to the story that's being told that you have to get in. So, like I said, that may be a quote in a package or in an interview segment that you're able to kind of bring forward. Some of that stuff is discussed ahead of time. But I mean, like as far as getting to know the guy, like you're talking to the guys all the time. You're getting stuff. Like, hey, any new stories for me or whatever. So on the indies, it's a little bit easier because you can kind of tell whatever story you want. WWE is different because, some like guys may tell you, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this, and that, or there's a lot of stuff I remember guys coming up, oh hey, I got this new move, I'm gonna call it the fucking whatever. And I remember one time I went and I said it, and I was like, what the hell is that? I don't know, that's what he told me to call it. No, you got to get that cleared. Oh, okay. Interesting. Then there were other times where stuff didn't have to get cleared, and it was just fine. So there was seemingly no rhyme or reason for that.
How long does it take you to get good at it? Because I saw an interview that you did where, you said when you were in NXT, it was like 2 and 3 hours a day at the Performance Center, just doing like mock broadcasts and doing mock matches and working with Corey Graves when he was first starting to make that turn into becoming a broadcaster. What are you getting out of that, and how did that play into your development, and how much better did you get for all of that along the way before you eventually made your way to TV?
A lot of that is just really getting your footing and kind of figuring out the pieces of a match. A lot of people that watch wrestling, a lot of fans don't, people that are into it don't even really understand the way a match is laid out. So, like when I was saying, you got your heat spot, you have your comeback, you've got your cutoff, you've got those different elements of a match. Calling those, spending hours in the PC, in the VO room, just calling stuff over and over and over again, you start to recognize certain things. So you kind of get that rhythm. And again, with WWE, if it's a weekly TV show, you kind of get a sense like, okay, this is going to be like a 6-minute match or an 8-minute match. So you kind of know what's coming. So I don't want to say there's a formula, but there's kind of a rhythm to it. As far as learning in there, I mean, it's just, just finding your voice and finding your confidence and just kind of understanding the whole thing, understanding the business as a whole. It's important. I'm trying to think of the best way to maybe explain it, but it's I've heard that, for example, like Joe Buck, I've heard, for instance, like he's talked to Cole before. I don't know if he came to a show or whatever, but Joe Buck and some of those big network guys have said like that they couldn't do what they do at WWE. In other words, they couldn't do what Cole does at WWE. And I'd be willing to bet there's probably nobody that can handle the amount of traffic, can handle the amount of changes and everything. That's why Cole has been on Raw for as long as he's been, because it's such a demanding, difficult position. That is a very nuanced position that it's very difficult to train for that. You just you can either do it or you can't. And a lot of guys can't. So again, as far as being in the performance center and just learning, it's like anything else. It's just repetition. The more reps you get, then the better you're going to be. It's like anything else, swinging the bat in the batting cage or whatever.
How many voices are in your ear when you're doing a SmackDown or a TakeOver or just an NXT, weekly show? And how many voices are in your ear at the same time, I guess is the bigger question.
There's a producer and a director. So, and then if they want the agent, they could, the agents can get in there. So let's say for NXT, for instance, like Cole would be my main producer. And then you'd have the director in the truck who's counting you in and out of stuff. And then the agents, like Triple H or whoever back at Gorilla, they can pipe in. But usually it's just your director and your director and your producer, and then the two guys you're working with. So in theory, you've got 4 voices plus your own that you're trying to keep track of.
So this is a question I've always had too, and I really thought about it a couple of weeks ago, WrestleMania weekend, when it was at TakeOver, and I forget which match it was. I think it was either the North American ladder match or it might have been Ciampa Gargano, when the table got destroyed and Morrow's mic actually cut out. And I've always thought to myself, like, when people are destroying announce tables, why doesn't the mic cut out more often? Like, why are there not more technical problems when the entire announce table is destroyed? So I'm curious from your perspective, what are table spots like? I mean, how do you get how much stuff do you have with you? How do you get it out of the way? Like, have you ever had anything broken? And how do you still do your job when, your setup is gone and your monitors are always the first thing gone? How does life go on? How does the show go on?
Just as far as getting your stuff out of the way, if you're lucky, they tell you.
Okay, great.
You can kind of sense when
that was my iPad.
Yeah. I mean, I remember one show in particular where I think it was SmackDown. I was there with Jerry Lawler, and we both drink Diet Coke during the show. Like, I'd have water and I'd have to take a Diet Coke to kind of keep my throat clear. So you take the can and you put it in a roll of tape, and it's kind of under like the little lip of the announce desk up on the top. I remember Roman Reigns coming over at one point, and he did came over to hit a senton on the table. Might have been Sheamus or something, whoever it was. So whoever it is moves. He ends up coming. He just flops back first on the table, and he lands right on the soda, and the soda exploded. And so now there's soda just God, I wish I remember what show it was, because I'd love to go back and kind of like look at a replay because you can see it when he comes and does. You just see like this explosion of Diet Coke. So you know you've got your run sheet. You've got another sheet. It's called the truck sheet that kind of has like the numbered items, which is easier, so they can tell, hey, number 58 is dead. Just jump right to 59, right? So you have that. It can be sometimes you don't know. I remember one of the first shows I did. I think it was Superstars, and Luke Harper did a spot as we were going to commercial, and he had a chair, and he comes walking over. Now here's the thing. This is like one of my first shows on the main roster, and you're taught eyes on the monitor. Don't ever take your eyes off the monitor because you're calling what's on the monitor. So you're not tipping stuff out. So in other words, if there's a run-in, you don't want to mention the run-in before the person at home sees it.
Yeah,
that's why you're calling that's why you're calling what's off your monitor. Well, here comes Harper, and he's in kind of like in front of the ring, and he grabs a chair and he starts coming over to the announce table, and I'm calling this, not realizing that he's walking over towards me because my sense of direction was just so. So I'm used to being at that point. Used to be either in the VO room or at NXT, and you call stuff. You're not ringside at NXT for the regular TV show. But anyway, so he comes over and he's got this chair, and as I'm going to break, right out of the corner of my eye, I see him coming at me, and I'm like, uh-oh. And I tossed a break, and he kind of like threw the chair, swung the chair, and just missed me by like a quarter of an inch as we went to break. So I remember talking to him afterwards. I'm like, dude, you almost took my eye out. He's like, oh man. I was coming over with the chair, and I'm thinking, he sees me. Oh shit, he doesn't see me. So, as far as table spots and that kind of thing, like. Yeah, sometimes sometimes you don't. You just have to, as far as your stuff, you just try to gather your stuff and get out of the way.
What's more fun? And I don't mean that pejoratively toward, WWE or the national television kind of production side of things, but is there more fun in the freedom? I don't even know if it's right to say more fun, but is there more freedom? Is there an enjoyment factor to the freedom of doing play-by-play for, now MLW or an independent show, when it is less the production side of things and more the ability to, straight up call a match in some respects and be more on the action and worry kind of less about the periphery, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's when somebody tells you to be yourself, it's nice to be able to just be yourself and go out there and do it. And I think that probably is the difference. WWE, you're hired to play the role of an announcer, whereas like MLW and the Indies, and you can argue it's the same thing, but I feel like I just am an announcer as opposed to playing the role of an announcer. And it's a nuanced distinction, I think, but. And it's probably kind of hard to explain to people, but I think it does matter. For instance, like I was calling MLW the other night, and I kept talking about a title opportunity. I said it a couple of times. Like Court Bauer buzzes me in the headset. He says, "Hey, Rich, you can say title shot here." I was like, "Oh." So I think you can kind of. Yeah, I think I said title shot like 3 times in succession just to kind of pop him a little bit and just be like, oh, okay, great. Hey, he really wants this title shot. This title shot means the world to him. Like, I forget exactly what I said, but that's kind of the difference too. Again, it all depends on the production. It all depends on what the producer wants, kind of where they want to go with things. But by and large, MLW and then the independents, like. Some of the independents I do is just a free for all. I can say whatever I want, which is good and bad sometimes. But I don't think one way is necessarily more right or more wrong than the other. I think it just kind of depends on the product that you're putting together. But as far as calling it, it's more fun. Clearly, it's more fun not to have as many restrictions.
How did you get into it all? Because I know you were doing hockey, and then we're working in the AHL, and got involved with Booker T down in Houston, and we're doing, play-by-play on, their YouTube broadcasts. But how do you go from that point to broadcasting in the WWE on national television? And what are the steps in between that kind of leads to all of that happening? I mean, how did that all come to be, I guess, is the short answer, or the short question.
I still don't know.
Okay.
It's kind of a long-winded story. And again, if I start to ramble, feel free to cut me off. So I was in Houston. I had worked in hockey for a long time. I was there working for the Houston Aeros, and I was the PR guy at that point. Wasn't doing play-by-play for them, but I was the PR guy. Worked at a sports radio station part-time doing sports updates. And for a while, I was the PR guy for Comcast Sportsnet Houston. If you follow that fiasco at all, if you don't know anything about Comcast Sportsnet Houston, just Google it and you can read about it, and you can imagine what life was like being the public relations guy for that. So anyway, wrestling was kind of my escape. I did an NWA Houston. I trained to be a referee for a little bit, refereed a couple matches, but they needed a ring announcer. Ended up getting hooked up with Booker's show. That grew to the point where, we had a YouTube show, and then we got better. Finally got it on local TV. The whole time I was doing this, WWE was never really a thought in my mind. Like, in the back of my head, it was like, oh, it'd be cool if Vince heard me, ha ha ha. I remember saying to Booker and Kevin Kevin's like Booker's producer. I just remember joking with him one day saying, well, I'm not going anywhere unless Vince or the NHL calls me. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here in Houston. I'm your play-by-play guy. Not thinking that, I'd ever really get any kind of an opportunity. So I had the day job at the, doing PR for Comcast, for the sports network. That was, again, a nightmare. Just because, the business arrangement just wasn't good. So it was very, very difficult. Wrestling was my escape. And it was just something I did for fun. That's all it was. I had interviewed with the Houston Texans. I actually interviewed with CBS Radio as well. So, like I said, I worked with them part-time. Interviewed with them for a web gig that I didn't get. And then interviewed with Mark Vandermeer with the Texans. They were looking for like a reporter, kind of like an online content guy, to do some web reports and do some writing and just different things. Truth be told, I'm not a huge football guy. I like it enough. I watch it, but I'm not a super football guy. So I wasn't really passionate about it, and I think that was obvious. But Mark had listened to my stuff and he was really complimentary of my work. And I had a couple of other people tell me this too, like, man, you should really be calling games somewhere. Like, I don't know where, but you should be calling games somewhere. And that was kind of the crossroads for me, where I was like, I've been in the minors, I've done the thing where I've ridden the bus, made awful money, to work 90 hours a week and ride the bus and do all that stuff. I've been there, I've done that. Like, in my late 30s at this point, it's like, do I want to? There have been opportunities, minor league hockey gigs that I probably could have gotten had I really pursued it. But it's like, did I want to go and make $20 grand a year, $25 grand a year again at 30 something, and having just gotten married and whatever? It was actually my wife who suggested that I talk to Booker and said, talk to him, see if, and this is right before they announced that the WWE network was coming, all this different stuff. So it was just kind of on a whim. I talked to him one day. I said, hey, I interviewed with the Texans, didn't work out, yada, yada, yada. They told me, Mark told me that I should call a game somewhere. I don't really know what to do, but, you think that WWE, you think I'm good enough? And he was like, yeah, I think you're ready right now. So that kind of got the ball rolling for that. And it took a while, but Cole saw my stuff, came up. I met with Cole, and then he brought me down to Florida for a tryout, and the rest is history.
Obviously, you still are big in the wrestling side of things, and certainly with the MLW stuff coming down the pipe here. But how much is hockey still on your radar. I guess how much do you miss hockey, and is that something you still want to do here down the road?
I would love to call hockey again. I would love it. Absolutely love it. It's my goal from day one getting into this. I started out as honestly, I started out as a hockey announcer. That's what I wanted to do. And it's funny how different opportunities come up, and different paths take you different places. Like 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, if you would have told me that I would have called matches for WWE, I would have told you out of your mind. There was a while, to be honest, in the 90s, I didn't really watch wrestling. I didn't like the Attitude Era stuff. I enjoyed ECW to an extent, but WCW for, towards the end, I thought was crap. I didn't like it. I didn't like what the WWF was doing, because it was too over the top, just trashy and crass. Just didn't like it. So I didn't really, like I said, the ECW stuff, you could say, well, that was the ultimate in crass. But it was, to me, it was more obvious that it was like a show for adults, as opposed to a WWE show, which to me is supposed to be, I think some of the PG stuff is a little too far now, but it's kind of supposed to be I don't need to see a bra and panties match in WWE. You know what I mean? It's embarrassing if I'm sitting there with my wife, or, your 10-year-old kid, and all of a sudden here comes or, when they did a live sex show on Raw, why?
That didn't go well.
You know what I mean? No, so, I wasn't into that, but as it kind of, I don't want to say more towards, focusing on the athleticism again. I guess that's kind of what drew me back in. I'd always been a fan. I'd always enjoyed it to an extent, but, kind of got back into it maybe more as they started to accentuate a little bit more of the athleticism. But yeah, dude, I never thought that I would, again, I called the show at Madison Square Garden. I could say I called a cage match and a title match at Madison Square Garden. If you would ask me, yeah, you know what I mean? It's crazy when I think about it, but it's I called shows at the TD Garden in Boston, at the Dunkin' Donuts Center in Providence, where I grew up going to shows as a kid. And I called hockey games in Providence when I was in the American League. So it's kind of this weird thing, but as far as Boston Garden, or, the Montreal, not the Forum, but the Bell Center, all these buildings, if you would ask me 10 years ago, I'd be, oh yeah, I'll be in those buildings when I get to the show, when I'm calling games in the NHL. Never, ever, ever would have thought that WWE would be something that I'd do.
I want to ask you about one other random broadcast that I know you've done, and that's just from a personal standpoint, because I'm getting set to broadcast the CrossFit Games regionals coming up here in I don't know, about 2 months. But I know you did Grid League, which I guess for all intents and purposes team professional CrossFit racing in some respects. What's it like? How did you broadcast, I guess, competitive weightlifting, for lack of a better term? Any advice in that arena?
I got a call. I have an agent I got a call, and he's like, "Hey, you're familiar with the NPGL?" I'm like, "Well, I'm familiar with it in that I've heard of it." And he's like, "What's your availability these days?" Whatever. Like, okay. So, I got the gig. So it was basically, I had about 2 weeks to basically learn what the sport was. Learn who the athletes were, learn what the different elements are. It was helpful in the sense that, I worked with a group of people that had been doing it for a couple of years. And Chris Doring, who does stuff for the SEC network, used to play for the Gators, played in the NFL. He was one of the color guys. So he was able to explain a lot of what was going on. And then there was this other guy, Pat, who was the other color guy, who competes in CrossFit. So he understands a lot of the stuff. For me, it was just more about kind of, let's just explain what the movement is, because there are different elements of and at the end of the day, it's a race. The Pro Grid League, it's a race. So everybody understands racing, right?
Yeah.
So it's a matter of kind of boiling that down and just kind of explaining what the different elements of each race are, whether it's, handstand push-ups or, having to walk 50 yards on your hands or doing, up and overs or whatever the movement is, being able to explain kind of, okay, this guy's a specialist in this area and the way that they tag in and out. I remember the first time I saw it, I wasn't involved in it. It was probably about a year before I did it. I remember seeing it on TV. And I remember thinking to myself, who the hell wants to watch people lift weights on TV, right? But when I got asked to do it, and I actually kind of really watched it and learned it, there's actually like a lot of strategy that goes into it. It's actually a pretty fascinating, a fascinating way that the teams work together, and the way that the individuals work together, how things are timed, and how they know, like, going into a particular race, okay, this guy's going to go and he's going to lift. He's going to do 5 reps and then he's going to tag, and this guy's going to come in for it. It's all very streamlined and calculated, and it was actually really a lot of fun, kind of learning what that sport was about, and kind of figuring that stuff out.
Do you know what's next for you now?
No clue. That's the $1 million question. Yeah, I mean, I always say my goal's always been to call stuff in the NHL. Like I still want to call hockey games. It's just a matter of, I suppose, finding the right fit.
Sure.
Something that I can do, and I guess not go broke doing it, and still actually be able to have a life. That's kind of, I guess, one of the things is as you get older, it's like, you get away like, God, am I going to be able to do 100 hours a week working for this minor league team and make barely enough to survive? Like, it's one thing to be 24, 25 and do that. It's another thing to be 40, 41.
Sure.
And doing that. So it's, I'm not saying that I won't, but it's just kind of one of those things where, like, the timing has to be, I guess the timing's going to be right. But, well, I just, I'm hoping that this MLW thing grows, and, I've got some other irons in the fire. So it's one of those things, I guess we'll see what happens.
I guess if people want to reach out to you, get in touch with you, or if they want to find MLW on beIN, how do they go about tracking you down on social media? And
for MLW, go to MLW.tv or MLW.com, and you can check out stuff. MLW.com is probably the easiest source to get all the stories and stuff. But it'll be every Friday night starting April the 20th on beIN Sports, and then there's a replay at 11 for Major League Wrestling Fusion. So that starts this Friday, so I'm psyched about that. And then if anybody wants to track me down, I'm on Twitter under my real name, Rich Bocchini. It's RichBoccini. And reach out and kind of like you did. You sent me a note, hey, would love to talk to you. So I'm pretty accessible, and I've always kind of worn my heart on my sleeve and kind of an open book. So more than willing to share anything that I've learned, and that helps somebody else out in the business, then great. I was kind of half joking before we started, and I was talking to my wife and said, hey, I'm going to be on the phone for a little bit, and kind of told her what I was doing. And I don't know if you've ever come across this, but when I have like kids in school or whatever say, oh, how'd you get into play-by-play? What advice do you have or whatever? And I say this kind of tongue in cheek, but I mean this. Honestly, my advice is don't. Don't. And I know that sounds crazy, right? But I talk to some kids that are going to school. I have a daughter, and her boyfriend is like, well, I want to be involved in sports. And he's a junior in college. So he said, okay, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to work in sports. Okay, well, what do you want to do? Well, I don't know. I just want to work around sports. And I said, oh, that sounds great and fun and whatever, but you're going to end up, on the phone selling tickets, chasing your tail. And let's be honest, when you're in the minors, 90% of those sales gigs are chasing your tail. It's very difficult. Sponsorship, if you can get into the sponsorship side of it, there's more opportunity there. But basically my advice to him was, don't get into sports. Go and get your degree in Like, don't get a radio television degree. Don't get a sports management degree. Get like a business degree.
Yeah.
Get something. Get something else that you can do away from all this bullshit. And if you really want to do this, you can. If you're a play-by-play guy, you can do play-by-play. You can be involved in that. You can do it on the side. Get your degree in something else. Even if you end up working in sports for a little bit, you've got this other degree where you can go. Like, you don't need to rely on sports. Like, that's not an option for everybody. When I was coming up, there were still, radio jobs were still fairly plentiful. The media consolidation hadn't completely taken over the way that, it's super, super difficult now. Like the job that I have doing sports updates, I think I have something like 60 stations that I upload to every night. Well, even if you break that down to, a quarter of that or whatever, that's at least 15 jobs that used to be there that are no longer there because everything's consolidated, right? Mm-hmm. So there used to be 15 guys that would be reporters or update anchors or whatever that no longer have those jobs because everything's consolidated in radio. Just the way technology has changed things. So, again, I don't know how many kids come up to you and say, hey, you're going to need advice for somebody getting in. I know it sounds negative and it sounds counterintuitive, but when I say don't, I don't mean don't get into it, but I mean, don't go to school for it. You can learn.
Don't pigeonhole yourself.
Yeah, get your real estate license or get an accounting degree or something. You can, learn how to fix cars. I don't know. Do something else, and then you can kind of do this stuff on the side. And then if it grows and you enjoy it, awesome. And if you get opportunities to do stuff, it's great. But it's there are times that I wish that I had like that I knew how to fix like air conditioners or something. You know what I mean? Like I'm in Florida, and it's like kind of when you're in between gigs or whatever. Because that's the other thing in this business. There will come a point when you're in between gigs, and you don't know how long that's going to be. It'd be nice to be able to go and kind of I can get a gig as an HVAC technician or something and make make solid money and still be able to do the play-by-play stuff on the side. So I hope that's not too long-winded, but no, that's my blanket advice to young guys. Have something else you can do.
I usually end on that question, but if I can, I want to bring it full circle here with you, and if I can ask you a technical question. From a on-air performance standpoint, having worked in the WWE, having been on national television, what is it like from a growth process at that level in terms of on-air performance and on-camera performance? And are there things that you took from that and learned from that in terms of how you carried yourself, how you acted on air, how you looked on air, how you spoke on air, any of that kind of stuff that that still sticks with you and that helped grow you as a broadcaster along the way?
The biggest thing is, just to relax and just roll with whatever happens. As far, on camera, I think I'm a better straight up play-by-play guy than I am like on camera, like as an on-camera host or that type of thing. Like I don't think I'm bad as an on-camera host, or I don't think my on-cam's terrible, but it's not necessarily my strongest point. I'm a better, for lack of a better, I don't want to say better radio play-by-play guy, but like I'm a better better play-by-play guy than I am being like a host.
No, I feel the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and I don't know that the two things are. They're different skills that I guess intertwine and overlap, but I feel like they are kind of two different things in some ways. But I mean that's part. If you're on TV, you have to be able to toss the things. The way WWE does it, you're more of a host. The play-by-play guy is often referred to as the host,
okay,
as opposed to, again, you talk like a Joe Buck. Like Joe Buck's not always tossing to packages. Sometimes he is, but it's usually those on cams are kind of quick, right? They'll show the on cam and they're just talking about, oh geez, before we went to break, that pickoff play was blah 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 blah. Let's take a look at the throw over to first. Oh yeah, it looked like the manager had a reason to argue. You know what I'm saying? It's that kind of an on cam, and then they kind of go back to the action. Whereas WWE, you're you're bridging, you're transitioning from one thing, you're in the middle, and now you're throwing to something else to advance the story. So I guess, like I said, the biggest thing that I learned is, number one, should just try to relax and roll with whatever happens. But the other thing is, you kind of have to think ahead to, where am I going? What's coming up? What am I tossing to? I'm trying to keep that stuff straight. I don't want to say it's difficult, but with all the voices and all the noise around you and everything, it takes a certain amount of, it takes some practice to be able to get to that stuff. And especially at WWE, sometimes they'll have your color guides to mess with you just for the fun of it. I worked with JBL for a little bit. JBL's role was to be a heel. And I've said before that he was difficult to work with. And he was. I don't know that it was malicious, but I'm just saying as a heel, he would just, any opportunity that he got to jump on you for something, he did it. So to be able to take that and still not get totally flustered and still be able to get to where you need to go. I'm not saying it's hard or you just have to be ready for that kind of thing. You just got to kind of go with what they throw at you and just get to where you need to go. So it's challenging, but it can be done, but it's challenging.
That's Rich Bocchini joining us here on Play-by-Playcast of MLW Fusion, formerly of World Wrestling Entertainment. Moral of the story when it comes to destruction of your broadcast position, by the way, make sure that your soda can is out of the way of Roman Reigns. That's incredible. Can you just imagine? Can you imagine doing it happens. It happened in the Final Four. And I'm blanking on who it was now, but one of the guys from Michigan, it might have been Mo Wagner. I think it was, ran over Bill Raftery and, bent his glasses. But can you imagine somebody being slammed through your broadcast position if you're doing another sport? That doesn't happen, but it happens to wrestling guys all the time. And it happened WrestleMania weekend, with Mauro. Mauro Ranallo was doing NXT TakeOver, and his microphone stopped working. And it was the first time I've ever noticed that, actively caught it. I'm sure it's happened before. But I've been like, God, Mauro's mic stopped working when they destroyed the announce table. Man, that seems authentic. They probably snapped a cord. I don't know. I've always wondered, my phone, how many people, raise your hand right now, do a broadcast where your laptop or cell phone are out on the table in front of you? Goodbye, laptop. Seth Rollins just went through the screen. I can't imagine having to get all my stuff out of the way in time. Or if Luke Harper almost hits me with a chair. Hazards of the job. Now, would I sign up for it? Because I'd love to do play-by-play for wrestling, sports entertainment. Yeah, absolutely. But one near chair shot to the head by accident, I might be out. One of the hazards of the job. Many thanks to Rich for joining us on this episode. Kind of an interesting venture and dream come true. Sounds weird, but it's been a dream of mine on this podcast to talk play-by-play of pro wrestling. So I'm glad that on episode 98 we got to dive into that today. Again, check out MLW Fusion. It is Fridays at 8 p.m. Fridays at 8 p.m. on beIN Sports. Contact your cable provider for local listings. Go to getbein, bein.beinsports.com. Getbein.beinsports.com. Next week, Lanny Fratteri, former voice of the Pittsburgh Pirates of 33 years. He did the We Are Family team in 1979. He was there when Sid slid. He'll talk about Barry Bonds. He was the broadcaster of the basketball game where Bob Knight threw the chair. We will get to all of that and much more next week, right back here on PXPcast. Until then, we're out. Hit it, Marshmallow.